All right, let's start with the good news. So our next guest is an organizing committee member of Pink Dot, the group that pushed for the repeal of that Singapore sex ban. Clement Tan is joining us from the Lion City. Clement, thanks so much for joining us. How big of a breakthrough is this for Singapore, and how far do you think this ban actually goes?
Well, thank you for having me. I think no matter how you want to slice this is undoubtedly progress. The government has rightly acknowledged the generations of harm, trauma and hurt that has caused the LGBTQ community. They've taken the right step to finally discarding a colonial-era law, a relic that we'd inherited. And so for all of us hearing the news last Sunday by Prime Minister Lee, it's given us a sense of overwhelming relief.
So what's next then for you guys?
Well, our focus right now actually is just coming together as a community and processing this news. For actually a lot of us, especially from those in the older generation, many of us didn't actually think that this day would arrive even in our lifetimes. There's a lot of generational trauma that we actually need to start healing from. We also think things might get a little bit uglier in the lead up to the parliamentary debates. Already after the announcement, we heard segments of society which were very upset about this news. So we will actually be watching the debates very closely and making sure that the community's mental health is prioritized. We think the work still also goes on. LGBTQ organizations like Pink Dot will continue to address immediate and urgent areas of discrimination that the community faces. This is everything from bullying and harassment in schools to discrimination in the workplace, media censorship, and the like.
Clement, I mean, baby steps. I mean, this one's been a long time coming here, but, it does throw up a lot of other questions with regard to the recognition in legal terms of just a relationship between a man and a woman and a woman, doesn't it? Because, for instance, you're an expat, you may have a partner. Can a visa be applied to that partner, even though they're not married? Can somebody who is a partner of somebody who's in hospital go and see them, for instance, as well? And, legally speaking, these are all huge grey areas, and the answer to a couple of those questions is no.
Yes. So I think one thing to sort of point out is that the government has since clarified after the announcement on Sunday that this constitutional amendment that they're proposing is very specific in nature. What they are not going to do, they've since clarified, is to enshrine any sort of legal definition of marriage between a man and a woman into the Constitution. Now, that is something that certain religious interest groups in Singapore have been campaigning very strongly and publicly agitating for. Just want to clarify that that is certainly not the case. If such an outcome had passed, that would have been very alarming. Now, what exactly the government is going to do with this amendment that they're proposing, I think that remains to be seen. We don't have the text in front of us. We don't know not only what it would look like, but how this will be discussed in Parliament. So we will be paying attention to that. And obviously, from Pink Dot's perspective, any further attempt to hardwire discrimination into legislation is something that would be disappointing to us. But we're just going to withhold judgment on that for the time being, and we'll see how the government follows through.
Could you elaborate more a little bit more on that, Clement? That comment you made on hardwiring discrimination into legislation. Are you seeing any signs of that about to come?
So certain religious interest groups continue to campaign for enshrining the definition of marriage into the Constitution. From us, that's concerning because the Constitution is secular in nature. Any attempt to sort of hardwire any sort of religious values in it should be concerning from a democracy and secularity standpoint. We also don't wish to see the hands of future parliament be bound to any sort of decision that's made by social mores today. Yeah.
There was that survey we mentioned about, how people are feeling about same-sex marriage. And it was actually quite interesting, right? Actually, a majority actually oppose same-sex marriage in Singapore. I have to get what your take is on that. How have attitudes actually changed, if any, Clement? And is there anything that the corporate community can do about changing those perceptions? Sure.
I think there's still some ways to go in society here in Singapore to tackle other issues that the community faces. 377A, and that's really a testament to how large the shadow of 377A has loomed large. It has been this thing on our backs for such a long time. All of the campaigning and advocacy is centered around this one issue because it's really been the linchpin for so much of the hurt, the trauma, and the lack of progress here in this country. So now that this is finally done, we can all breathe a sigh of relief. We can take a moment to reflect on all the work that's been done, but then the road to further equality, we know it's long. We know that further conversations need to take place in this country before we can reach a consensus on them. And I think what the government has done with repeal is to resoundingly take that step forward. So we are very cautiously optimistic about the future, even though we're not quite there yet for certain other areas of social consensus. We think things will change.
Yeah, I mean, Clement, I was going to ask you, how do you change hearts and minds? But, again, getting back to the point I was making earlier, okay, sex between men is recognized, but it's the relationship between men which is not.
Yes, and unfortunately, that's one of the things in the current state of social discourse and rhetoric that I do feel it's a bit disappointing. There's this talk about how we want to protect the institution of families and marriage from gay people. And it's like, well, I have a partner too. I have families too. I don't necessarily see this as necessarily opposed. It is something that we all yearn for. I think we're all humans that yearn for connection, yearn for stability, have loving relationships that eventually want to be recognized. This is a matter of dignity. This is a matter of something that Singaporeans should constantly question and reimagine for ourselves.
Clement, certainly.